Because we're not seeing it here. And I do think that eventually will be a problem. The markets don't seem to think it is. They are betting on some growth. Without getting into the weeds too much here, is there some truth that you will see some growth and that will create revenues? Because built in to the latest 10-year plan by one budget forecasting group and the CBO and all, 1.9% on an average. Certainly we can do better than that, right?
Right. So let's start with where we are expecting on growth. Tax reform will grow the economy. The argument had been if it would grow the economy by about 0.4% per year, that would have offset the $1 trillion in borrowing that we're finding this tax bill is going to cost.
0.4% over the established rate of 1.9%?
That's right. So
All right,
bringing it
so
up to 2.3%,
okay.
Which doesn't sound too high, right?
No.
We've done much better than that in the past. The difference is our population is aging. They're retiring. Our labor market force is not growing like it used to. In fact, it will only contribute 1/4 as much to growth going forward as it has in the past. That brings down our growth. So that 0.4 is actually very hard to do because we don't have the labor market boosting it up. The problem is that the scores on the tax reform bill, I know everybody wants to sort of bank this on a wish and a hope and a dream, but the scores said that it will grow the economy each year by about 0.08%. And so pretending the growth is going to be much more means we are going to end up with a much larger debt. And building on the conversation you were just having beforehand, this on top of the fact that yes, indeed, we are on track to borrow $10 trillion over the next 10 years. And you know who's been talking about that a lot is us. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget is really worried about that. Republicans had talked about doing a budget that was going to get to balance over 10 years. But instead, they've absorbed. They now plan to borrow that $10 trillion, and they just added another $1.5 trillion to it, making the situation worse after economic growth, not better. And that's what we're really worried about when this day of reckoning is going to happen. If we keep taking the easy choices, tax cuts, they'll pay for themselves, when by all accounts they won't. This debt is going to grow and grow and grow, and the outcome is going to be very bad for the economy.
But, you think about, I've gotten into this before during Obama years and these years. I mean, with very little, severe pain, you could adjust even the growth rate of some of these entitlements, as Paul Ryan wanted to do when he was running House Ways and Means. He was just slowing the growth, and yet they portrayed him as throwing Granny off a cliff. And that was just slowing the growth in an entitlement. Now, a lot of people hear that and hear entitlement, and they think, oh, no, we're entitled to this. It's not entitlement. It's not a gimme. The fact of the matter is, these are the biggest ballooning parts of our spending. And just by changing the trajectory slightly, it's a whole different game.
That is completely correct. That Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, those are the big items in the budget. Those are the big items in the debt. We have spending that is growing faster than our revenues, and we just made a plan to bring in less revenues to pay for that spending instead of more. But we can control that spending by slowing the growth. What I would say, though, is judging on the budget that Republicans just passed, where they didn't touch a single entitlement, what's going to be needed is bipartisan efforts. Republicans have not shown that they want to do this on their own. And so from a political economy perspective, I think we just made it so much harder to touch those entitlements because Democrats won't help now, and we need them to.
If you have the aforementioned Chuck and Nancy, now Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi eager to meet with the president on Thursday, so maybe they're back all in good graces, then there might be room after this for a bipartisan deal on spending. I know maybe it's the season. Hope springs eternal. Yeah. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I wish I shared your optimism. First, they're going to meet to talk about not having the government shut down, which is going to if we don't do the funding. That's very different than undertaking fundamental entitlement reform, which we need but is much harder. I'll tell you what I'm worried about. What we're about to do is bust through the spending caps that exist. We have a sequester in place. And by all accounts, both Republicans and Democrats are eyeing how to lift those budget caps and start spending more. I hope they're going to offset those costs, but I have my concerns. And we have a pay-go sequester as a result of this tax reform bill, which would reduce spending by $150 billion per year. You know who's promising us that they're not going to have those spending cuts? The leaders of the House and Senate. McConnell and Paul Ryan both came out with a release saying we're not doing that sequester. So there's no appetite for spending cuts or entitlement reform on either side of the aisle, from what I can see.
No, they both have to jump off together, right? You have to risk jumping off the cliff together.
I would have said that, but after this tax reform bill, I think that hope of jumping off together just got a lot more difficult because Democrats are saying, you just took all the revenues off the table. Now you want us to jump with you? I think that makes the negotiation more complicated. I wish we'd done entitlement reform first.
Yeah, but they started it. I have no idea.
They started it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very, very much.